Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Fortnightly Dispatch, brought to you by the Baker Street Irregulars. I am your host, Ross Davies. Yes, I am your host. And that clearly means to all regular viewers that we have a very special guest today, the regular host of this program, Steve Doyle. And to go through the conventional routine of listing the major accomplishments of our guest before the interview would take too long. I'm going to skip all of that and go direct to welcoming Steve to the show. Steve, welcome to the Fortnightly Dispatch. Well, Steve, as I believe you know, we normally start these shows with a couple of standard questions. And so just to remind you of how we start here, the first question is, where are you coming to us from today?
Well, Ross, we are coming to the show today, as we always do, from my Sherlockian library here. It kind of goes back, and then it kind of hooks that way. Can't really see around the corner back there, but it's my, I call it intermittently my office, my library, because it's kind of both. It's a working library. I call it my center of the Sherlockian universe down here. But that's where we're coming from, down in the basement of our house here in Zionsville, Indiana.
And where is Zionsville within Indiana?
Zionsville is a northwestern suburb of Indianapolis. If you think of Indianapolis as a clock, we're at about 11 o'clock, just literally on the outside of the boundary between Indianapolis and Zionsville. And I mean, they are butted up against each other. And so we're in the greater Indianapolis area. So,
alrighty, very good. Now, before we go to the second customary question, I do have an uncustomary follow-up to the first question, which is this. I think I am not alone among Sherlockians in seeing your basement or imagining your basement as being, to the Sherlockian world, sort of what the TARDIS is to the world of Doctor Who. There is far more going on in that basement than there can possibly be room for in the basement of a normal house in Zionsville, Indiana. So either it's an abnormal house or there's some abnormal physics involved in your basement. And so if you are willing, I think we would all appreciate some evidence that all those different rooms that we see in your basement are all there at the same time. Would you, in other words, give us a little tour, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. But they are all here.
All right.
As you will see. Okay, so we'll do a tour, and let's go.
All righty. Thank you very much, Steve. And away we go.
So here we are in my library or office, whatever you want to call it. Behind me over there, back this way, is the computers, I should say, and the desk where I do a lot of publishing work for Wessex Press and Baker Street Journal, Gaston Books, and that sort of thing. It's sort of my the nerve center of a lot of what I do. Of course, we have bookshelves, lots of bookshelves in here, loaded up with Sherlockiana, lots of framed illustrations on the wall. Everything that I frame and hang here and outside in the other part of the basement, which you'll see shortly. Everything I have here is meaningful to me. Long ago, I realized that the real joy of collecting is when it has, of course, it has some kind of intrinsic cool factor, but when it can have a personal connection to you or have a personal meaning, you can't really put a price on that, can you? And there's lots of stuff in here that has that sort of personal association of some kind or another. So I guess we'll go ahead and head on out of this room here. I guess we'll start with the bar. That seems to be the centerpiece of people's fascination with my downstairs here. It's about as authentic an Irish pub as I can make it. I'm Irish, proud of it, and who doesn't like an Irish pub? This downstairs space is large enough that my wife and I have had many parties and receptions, both of a Sherlockian nature and just friends, get-togethers, parties. You will notice a lot of Notre Dame football, University of Notre Dame football. I'm a huge Notre Dame fan, grew up in South Bend, and I take very seriously their game day slogan, play like a champion. I take it seriously in two ways. You should do everything you can as best you can. Try to be a champion. But the active word for me very often is play. Play like a champion. And I do that a lot. And now behind me here is sort of a main gathering space. Couches, big screen TV, spaces to hang out and visit. Of course, a lot of my other interests are represented down here. Science fiction, horror. You'll see a lot of robots down here. You'll see my Walking Dead corner, which has screen-used artifacts and other memorabilia. And then last, but certainly not least to me, is what I call the bandstand or the music area. I play bass in a band called the Agtones, and with some other friends of mine. We haven't been able to play really for a year and a half, and it's a grief to me, but we're getting back in track now. But I do love playing music. I do love playing music. It's that creative, communal, creative thing that is very hard to replicate in any other venue. And so I love to come down here and rock out occasionally.
And now we're back in our regular seats. Thank you very much, Steve.
You're welcome. And you're all invited to come sometime.
But maybe not all at once, because it is not of infinite size.
No. There are limits to the space.
Okay, well, question number 2 that we normally ask is your origin story. How did you first encounter Sherlock Holmes, and connected to that, how did you first encounter the world of which we're all citizens together?
Well, I think it's not that unusual. I was 14, and it was 14, 15, right near the line. I was born in September, so but that summer, as we all remember, was that's sort of when Nicholas Meyer's 7% solution exploded in our universe, changing it forever. We've never gone back to what it was once that book appeared. And if you remember, if you can kind of cast your mind back to that, we everywhere you went, Sherlock Holmes was there. It was, you go to we lived near a shopping mall, and it was within walking distance. I would go there, and there would be, you go to the Walden's bookstore and there'd be these stand-up displays full of 7% solution. And as the way of the world is, it sparks all kinds of things that come along with it. Now they're reprinting copies of the canon, and everything is just happening because of this huge wave of popularity. And being a pop culture kid, I love science fiction. I love horror stories and classic horror movies, and popular music. I just, I'm a product of all of that. And so now I'm seeing this, and it's intriguing to me. And so I ask for Christmas. I'm in the store, and I see this trade paperback set of The Adventures and Memoirs. Now, I don't know anything about Sherlock Holmes. I think I was even in that camp of, was he real? I didn't even know. I didn't know. And so, but I found these two books. I should have pulled them, but these two reprint, it's kind of a set. And so I asked for them for Christmas. And so that Christmas, I got them. And they're reprints of the first editions, the first George Newnes editions, and with all the Paget illustrations and the vintage typesetting, which even then I appreciated, good typesetting, and I could get it, I could see it, and and I had also gotten a copy of the 7% Solution, and I read Adventures and Memoirs, and then the 7% Solution. And then right after that, and I was gone. I was a goner. It took me a while to figure out the pastiche thing. It's like, oh, this is like, oh, I get it. In that one kind of blinding revelation, people play with this stuff. This is a story that is sort of rewriting that story, and it was amazing to me. And Private Life by Starrett was right after that, the sort of pinnacle pulp paperback, mass market paperback. And at that point I was gone. I was a goner. So that was my origin story. I also then shortly thereafter, if you well, I'm not sure you remember, Ross, because you didn't find the Sherlockian community until, for years. I remember from our interview, but there was right in this time, there was also an article in the South Bend Tribune about a local Sherlock Holmes society starting up. And they were the Solitary Cyclists of South Bend, and led by a Notre Dame professor named Michael Crow, and a professor of philosophy. And I was always kind of precocious in this way. So I wanted to join, and there was an address in there. If you're interested in joining, write us. So I did, and I was like 14 or 15, right in there.
Okay, may I pause you for one moment here?
Sure.
And just say that I and all of our viewers are thinking about one word right now, right, which is chutzpah. Would it be fair to characterize the decades that have followed that 14-year-old's year as one long exercise in Sherlockian chutzpah?
Oh, I do think that's completely fair.
Okay,
I do.
Fair enough. Okay.
No, and here's why. Because I've always had a motto. I've joked with some of my over the decades, some of my friends who have volunteered to help on some things, or do actually are participants in some of the, for instance, the publishing ventures that I have had. And I always joke that my operating motto is, why not?
And
why
so
not?
Starting at age 14, that's what you're doing. Why not approach these university professors and ask if I can join their party?
Who says you invited me? You said write, so I'm writing. That's it's always sort of been my way. The other operating motto is, we can but try, or they can only say no. And that's another one that people don't. I'm a firm believer in that people are capable, just everybody is capable of doing far more than they think they can do. And there's no reason to, all you conference organizers out there, hey, invite whoever you would like to have them there. They'll only say no if they can't come. I guarantee you they'll be flattered to be asked, even if they can't come, but some may come. It happens. So just do it. There's, why not? That's my operating motto. Why not? So that's what I did. I just wrote. And they wrote back, and Michael Crow, Professor Crow, wrote back and said, yes. And then I had this stab of, ooh, maybe they don't know that I'm a kid. Now, of course they knew, because I've had the great blessing of having that letter that I wrote be returned to me decades later by Professor Crow, who somehow held on to it.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
That's
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. And of course, it's in this sort of early teen age handwriting. I mean, they clearly knew at a glance that this was not written by an adult. But I didn't know that at the time. So I thought, well, I better come clean. And so I wrote them back and said, look, I'm 14 or 15, whatever it was. And I understand if knowing this, that you've changed your mind. And this was a moment, a really important moment in there's 2 or 3 milestones like this. This was a very important moment for me, because they could have said, oh, well, come back when you're 18 or something, and I probably wouldn't have. But they didn't. They said, come on in. And I've never forgotten that. And, everybody should be welcome. And
that's lovely. Yeah.
yeah,
That's kind. That's kindness, right?
right. I don't like unkindness. I never have. And kindness, fair play, all that stuff is what we should all be about, particularly in this community.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And I'm just paying forward what's been given me over the years.
That's a lovely start, isn't it?
Well, it is. I'm not sure I did appreciate it at the time, but as I have grown older through the years, I have come to, I really have come to appreciate what that meant. And I sort of had a similar episode when John Bennett Shaw brought his first Sherlockian conference to Notre Dame 2 years later. I know I've spoken about this. Now I'm 16, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I
still at risk of being called an uppity punk.
Yeah,
by any great
right.
figure. So
Anybody,
you are still in a sense in danger and at the mercy of these powerful figures in this community.
Well, sure. I haven't really accomplished anything. I mean, I'm just going, and I really, your personal identity at that age is you're still not even really fully you yet, who you're going to be. And so I am just on fire with loving this hobby. And, but, these are accomplished grown men and women who are speaking, when you're a kid, adults almost speak a foreign language. It's almost, they kind of overlap, but there's clearly conversations and nuances and references that just, you don't have the toolkit yet to even comprehend them. And that was going on a lot that weekend. And I largely sat in the back row, completely invisible and highly intimidated by all of this. And as I have said before, at some point in this event, John Bennett Shaw, during a break, came up. I mean, surely he noticed me sitting back there, but he came up and he spoke to me. He didn't speak down to me. He didn't speak past me, or, he spoke to me Sherlockian to Sherlockian. And that was an enormous thing. It sort of validated some of the suffering I was going through sitting in that back row, invisible. So moments like that, I've had the blessing of moments like that. and have never forgotten them. And so I try to operate from those founding moments of mine as in what I do.
And I can say that personally, I have been a beneficiary of that, and for which I thank you. And I can also point to the physical embodiment of your extraordinary contribution to that welcomingness, or at least one of them, which is that if you don't know much about Sherlock Holmes and you're a little bit nervous about going to your first meeting, what would you go to the bookstore and look for? Right? One of those yellow and black books. Is there a yellow and black dummies book about Sherlock Holmes? Well, lo and behold, there is. And if we look at the bottom, we will see that the author the lead author is Stephen Doyle. So you really have paid it forward. And I'd love to know how this book came about.
Well, it has a checkered history. So it was around the in 2009 when the Robert, there hadn't been a Holmes movie. Let me back up for just a minute. Pop culture is the television, and motion pictures are it's like the canary in the coal mine.
Mm-hmm.
When you start seeing that stuff coming out on a top subject, that is a thing now. It's so Holmes was, as it always does, cyclically gets hot again. And so it was hot. And the first, theatrical motion picture in decades was coming out with Robert Downey Jr. And so I got this call from, I can't remember if it was I know there was a telephone call involved in this, but I know maybe the first thing was email. But anyway, I was contacted by someone at the publisher, Wiley. I know is I think it's Wiley. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you'd think I would just know that off the top of my head, but it's been a decade, everybody. So
well, I assume from the royalty checks, you're just accustomed to seeing. Maybe.
I was really rolling in it there. So, so they contacted me and said, "We want to do this book. We've looked on the internet." And somehow they got on to me, and they wrote to me and asked if I could recommend people who could do it, which was fine. I was like, sure. And I think I gave them a list of potential names and thought, well, that would be cool. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Good. And then they went away. And I think they actually approached a number of Sherlockians, foreign and domestic, that for one reason or another may have taken it, may have said yes, but then turned around and said, no, it's not for me, whatever. And they just couldn't get any traction. And so at some point, I think in desperation, they turned to the co-author, David Crowder, who had written a number of dummies books. Now, I'm not going to say anything here disparaging about Mr. Crowder, but he is not the author of this book.
No, you're the lead author. There's probably a reason for that. Yeah.
Right. And so he said, I'll take it on. He'd written dummies books about nothing about literature. But, as you know, the book is very structured, and, he knew that, but that's no big deal. So anyway, comes back, he takes it on. They write the contract contractually. He's, he does work on it. Then they come back to me at some point and say, we got a problem. This book is not happening. And the stuff that has been done on it, which was not much. I think there was some appendices and one chapter had been written. And they say, and we know, we're not Sherlock Holmes experts, but we know that this is not right. How about you? Can you do it? we looked at you and we think you might be good. So,
well, they were right about that, but go ahead.
They were. I'm quite proud of this book.
Yeah, it's a very good book.
So there was some back and forth. They said, here's the problem. We are legally obligated to include his name because he has worked on the book. I said, whatever, I don't, but you can do anything you want with what he's already written, which was like junked because it was factually in error. It's not a criticism. It just was not his area of expertise. And so I just dove in, and it was largely an entire brain dump of what I know, and the library here was an enormous help. Just what I love about the book is it's accessible, but it's not, it's not a by the numbers thing. If you actually get it and read it, dip into it, because it's made to be, you can just read it non-linearly if you want to. What I like about the book, though, is they gave me the latitude to have opinions and they just, I had to kind of follow their template. And at first that was restrictive. And I think that's might have been some of the things that drove people away. But, sometimes artistic expression kind of thrives if you put some boundaries around it. And once the logic of this learning model sunk in, I realized, I get it. Yeah, I get it. And then it was off to the races. So. In its heyday, I'm proud to say, it was the largest selling pre-ordered dummies book ever.
Wow. And as you say, it came out at a time in the Sherlockian cycle where that sort of fit. Right?
It was, yes, they were excuse me. Yes, they were quite eager to get it out because they knew this is the moment to strike. Yeah, this is the moment. And so because we got it out in time, it was in vogue for a while, so that was good. It was a good thing.
And it clearly served that purpose of helping people who had been exposed to Downian law and loved what they saw, an accessible point of entry into this larger universe.
Well, I think it did do that. I think a lot of people turned to it, as a sort of quick on-ramp, because that's what I want it to be. I want, everything, all the stuff that I do, one of the major motivators for me is to afford people an opportunity. I had to learn all that stuff, over 30 years, 40 years. And it wasn't onerous. Obviously, it's fun. Who would do something that's not fun? But some people don't have 40 years to do this. And, why? Let's share it. Here it is. Here's everything. Like I said, it's a brain dump. Here it is.
Well, in sympathy for Mr. Crowder, if I may, part of what makes your achievement with the Dummies book so impressive is that there is a structure for Dummies books, at least for those of us who are dummies and who have used more than one of these things.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine being someone who understands the structure of these things and thinks, well, doing this Sherlock Holmes thing, it'll be just like doing, how to operate a lawnmower or how to do whatever. And then they open the research doors of Sherlock Holmes and they see something that looks like the final scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
I think that's exactly what happened.
That's the achievement here, Steve, is that the brain dump is not a complete dump. It is a carefully orchestrated, accessible dump.
Well, part of that is because that's when the structure, that's when I saw that the structure, okay, this is an organizational tool, and I get it. And that's when it was, because otherwise I would have spent an enormous amount of time, you know, trying to even just organize it. But there was sort of a more organized, it was more organized for me. So that was good.
Let's take a break. We need to hear from our commercial sponsor. Okay, we're back with Steve Doyle, who, through a combination of chutzpah on his part and kindness on the part of people like Professor Crow and John Bennett Shaw, gets on the on-ramp in the Sherlockian world. And then, as he's moving up it himself, he builds an on-ramp for the rest of the world. And what do you find as a new Sherlockian when you get to the top of the on-ramp? You find this. Who's the publisher of this? Right? So, but then, one turns to the back cover of the Baker Street Journal, where there's an advertisement for this really, really impressive work of Doylean scholarship. And it's published by who? It's published by the Wessex Press. Who is the Wessex Press?
Well, half of it's me.
Yes. So I will give you a choice here, Steve. You may either start by explaining how you ended up as publisher of the Baker Street Journal, or you may start by explaining how you ended up as the co-publisher of the Wessex Press.
Well, I think Wessex Press predates, kind of led to the journal. I actually would have to fall back to the Sherlock Holmes Review. That's where I cut my teeth on.
In that case, we are going to get to a different question. Okay, this is arguably the most famous issue.
It is.
Of the Sherlock Holmes Review. And it's no coincidence that it's this cover that appears on the republication volume. But inquiring minds will want to know. Okay, so we have the Wessex Press. We have the Gassagene Press, right? But long, long ago, this is back in 1986, 87, right? We have the Sherlock Holmes Review staff, Stephen T. Doyle, editor, Charlie Largent, art direction, Pamela Wampler, editorial consultant, Bill Barton, Baker Street Bulletin. And the Sherlock Holmes Review is published 4 times a year not by any of these other presses we've talked about. It's published by the Carfax Press. Was the Carfax Press your first, and by the way, it is incorporated, right? Mm-hmm. Was the Carfax Press your first publishing corporation?
It was.
So where did the Carfax Press come from?
Well, Carfax Abbey is the residence of Count Dracula when he moves to England. And so it's one of my favorite books. I've always just liked the name. I think it's evocative and sounded cool. And so that's what that was.
And
this entirely the entire motivation for it.
That is fascinating. And just to do a little connect the ancient past to the present and near future, many Sherlockians would look at this and say, oh, this must be a reference to the disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax.
Right, but that was not it.
But it's not. It's because, as I understand it, your love of horror and sci-fi is as deep and long-lived as your love of the Sherlockian world. It is actually probably even longer.
In the early to mid '60s, all the Universal horror films, Dracula, Frankenstein, all that was syndicated into a movie package for television. First time they actually appeared on television as a thing called shock theater, and that's where we started seeing things like your local horror movie host would pop up, and and you would see, they'd show on your local creature feature every on Saturday night or something. And I can tell you that absolutely knocked me out as a kid. Wow. I mean, just could not believe how cool this was. And so that window of childhood, those kids that happened to were called monster kids. That's what they're kind of referred to now. That those kids that kind of boom got that got that bug, and my real education at that age was coming from famous monsters of filmland rather than school. Things like that. That's where. So yeah, it actually all predates even Sherlock Holmes, but it's all of a kind to me. It's an alternate world. It's a something you can kind of escape into. It often says something even when it's not trying to. Sometimes it is trying to. I don't know. I just think it's rich and wonderful.
And so at the beginning of your publishing life in the Sherlockian world, there is this strong thread of the horror, the supernatural, as well as the detective and so on.
Right.
So there's Bram Stoker and there's Conan Doyle. and so we have this long imaginative, productive life, right? That is ongoing, right? And energetic and so on and so forth. And we will not be able to cover every step of it today. But there is an interesting return to this particular kind of thing going on right now with you, isn't there? Both with the rebirth or the second life of the Sherlock Holmes Review.
Indeed, there is.
But there is also this connection to the Carfax Press, which is that don't you have a new imprint?
We do. Thanks for bringing that up, Ross. Very exciting, right?
Tell us more about these.
Everything, just like a good vampire, you can never quite put a stake in it. It's going to come back someday, and that's kind of been the theme of my life in a way. Yes, my Wessex Press, which is our book publishing company for well on 25 years now, which I can't really. That's amazing to me. We've seen them come and go, but we're still here somehow. So that's really astonishing to me. And of course, our first imprint was Gasogene, which was originally Gasogene Press, which was the David Hammer publishing company back in the 80s and early 90s. And many stories about that. And how, and we acquired it when he decided to sell it. And so that was our kind of, and we just made it, and we changed it, we tweaked the name and made it an imprint of Wessex Press. You'll see, if you look at our website, which is due for a massive upgrade here soon, you'll see.
And we should, by the way, if I may, we should go ahead and put a link to that here, and we will. So
there it is. But you can see that some books are published under the Wessex imprint, and most of them are under Gasogene, because most of them are very much Sherlockian oriented. If we think it has some crossover potential to a broader audience that's not Sherlockian, we'll bring it out under the Wessex Press imprint. But this has been the model now for a couple decades. But now we have a new imprint coming out, and it's called Night Shift Books, and it is. It's funny to be talking about this. I hadn't really thought about this so much but it is. It's the imprint that's going to be the horror, science fiction, ghost stories, UFOs, paranormal, plus anything else we want to throw in there. Associated things like science fiction, film, horror movies. Anything that's in that kind of parallel to me, for me, kind of parallel interest track, will be published under Night Shift. We're using a different publishing paradigm. We're still kind of working that out, but it's a lot of fun, and we're quite excited about it. And the first, we do have 2 or 3 books in the works as we speak. And when the first one out is a really fine collection of creepy stories by David Stewart Davies, who is a author that many of you know and
admire, yes,
and admire, and a fine writer. And what's great about David is we all know him for his Sherlocking works, but he's also an accomplished ghost story and creepy tale author too. He's had a couple of volumes published already by other publishers, so we are quite excited about that. And so yeah, well, thanks, Ross. Thanks for asking about that. That's a breaking news story right there. The Night Shift books.
And you heard it here first. But it really is a reflection of this interconnectedness of your interests over the decades. In fact, the interconnectedness goes in another direction as well, I might suggest, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, that there is a tendency, as lovely as the Strand books are, and the Strand publications are, to, once you've got something that works in the Sherlockian world, in a week or two, it becomes an unchangeable tradition, and it can never be abandoned.
That is true.
And it is an excommunicable offense to deviate from tradition. And yet you somehow have prospered for decades by basically going into the china shop, maybe not with horns on, but with a baseball bat, and just spinning around, dancing to your own tune. And so this, when it came out, was a truly extraordinary development in book design.
It got people's attention.
Right?
It did. It was shortly after that came out, I began to notice, I hadn't really anticipated this, but I had started to notice that some of our other longer standing publications, Sherlockian periodicals, began to kind of up their game a bit design wise. And so I took that as a sign that we were doing something right. So, but that's the thing. I have always appreciated, well, ever since I was a little boy, have always loved books. And so I grew up, my mother would read to me when I was little. My father bought, at some point, my brother and I read 48 Hardy Boy books in a row because, we loved them. My dad would always buy them for us, and that was great. And so I have had a love of books, not just the stories within it, but the physical experience of holding a book and reading a book. I'm not a fan of the ebook. I think a book is more than just words. For me, in my opinion, I know I'm not insisting on this, that other people believe this, but for me, a book is an experience. It's the physical. You hold the book in your hand. You hear it kind of crack open when you read it. You can smell it, the pages when it's new, or even when it's old, it has a different smell. And we're physical beings, and there's something about holding a physical book. And what that means for me is that book should reflect some quality in, if you want me to love this book, then it helps me to do that if I can tell that you as the publisher loved it enough to give it some effort on the front end. I am not a fan of print-on-demand volumes that just dump words into a template and then print. You're a printer, you're not a publisher. And that's a huge difference. The publisher takes on a work because he or she loves loves this work and wants to bring it to someone else. And they love it enough to show some of that love in that process. They're not just passing it through to sell it. And I mean, selling it is important, don't get me wrong, but you need to, I think it's I don't know. I think it matters. And so, you know, I'm very blessed that Mark Gagan, my friend and publishing partner for many years, we're on the same page about this. You know, the books should look like somebody cared about them.
A good publisher is a creator as well as a pipeline to the reader, is what you're saying.
Indeed.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so when, for example, the BSI Press puts out the manuscript series volume about Charles Augustus Milverton, they don't merely reproduce the illustration, an illustration from the story. It has new life in the hands of, now who did this cover?
Oh, well, Mark Gagan and I did it.
So this is another Steve Doyle and Mark Gagan production. So in addition to the Sherlock Holmes Review and the Carfax Press and Gassagine and Wessex and Sherlock Holmes for Dummies, you're also the publisher for the BSI Press? Is this what's going on?
No,
here?
I'm not the publisher for the BSI Press. That's
Bob Katz and John Berquist, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So your role with the BSI Press is
our role with the BSI Press is that we volunteer our services to produce the outside of the book, the stamping, for the boards, and the dust jacket that you see wrapped around the book, or if it's a paperback, the cover of the book.
So more lovely work. And if you want to see a bunch of that, you can go look at the BSI Press's website as well, where you can see a lot of Steve and Mark's work there. So we have now talked about numerous different kinds of publishing enterprises, past, present, future. But there is one that is at the core, that's the main trunk of all of these that you've alluded to, but we haven't talked about directly, and that's the Wessex Press. So can you give us just a few words so we have a sense about the Wessex Press, where it came from and what you do?
Sure. So going back, you know, we were doing Sherlock Holmes Review about halfway through that Mark came on board. He came on board. He sort of does that professionally. And we met in our local science society, the Illustrious Clients, and hit it off like that. And it became evident early on that he and I had complementary skill sets, complementary personalities. We're not the same, but we have complementary skill sets, and so we have just always worked well together. And we were doing the review, but it had kind of began to run its course. It kind of had run away from us. It was a victim of its own success in that we just couldn't. Got beyond sustainability in a timely way of getting it out and all kinds of things. So we decided to close it down. But in the meantime, we had done a book for the Illustrious Clients, which also has a long publishing history as a club. And that was the Illustrious Clients' fourth case book. And it was so fun and gratifying. It spoke to a lot of that I was talking about. Oh, we did a really bang up job on it. And that's to hold it in your hand. It was like, wow, this is a thing that did not exist before. And I think I said to him, look, I think I'm going to shut the review down. You want to start publishing books? And he said, sure. And we batted around a few names. I think Mark is the one who actually proposed Wessex Press. And honestly, there is a reason for what there was a rationale, but I can't. In the midst of time, he might remember it, but I do not remember why it was proposed and why we said, oh yeah, that's great. I don't remember, but it's it is so.
And it is an institution.
Now it is, yeah.
It really is. And so I am I think actually a part of a very large community of Sherlockians who can just reach over to their left and pull out, right?
Oh yes, right.
Sherlockian gospel practically here. Or Talmud maybe
it's
is
the reference
better
library, yes.
But this is a very active press. Mm-hmm. You've got a whole table of new stuff at the big January weekend, and
we do now.
Bulls. Right?
We were slowed down like everybody was during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. We're kind of ramping back up now, and so the second half of this year, we'll see. We'll start seeing some of the kind of the COVID delayed stuff manifest.
Super.
Yeah,
looking forward. Well, we are going to run out of time soon, which means we are going to not have time, at least on this conversation, to talk about your life as, in some ways, the Bill Graham Presents of the Sherlockian world, between the conferences you did with the Sherlock Holmes Review and the famous Gillette to Brett events. But I would like to close, if I may, with a question about a different kind of Steve Doylean celebrity, and that is that when one becomes a TV star, which you have become courtesy of the Fortnightly Dispatch, one becomes susceptible to being examined closely on screen. Your fans watch the whole stage and they look for clues and subtleties and so on and so forth. And those of us who faithfully watch the Fortnightly Dispatch have noticed that behind you on the couch, there is sometimes a Sherlockian dog and sometimes not. There is Sherlock Woof, or whoever it is.
Wishbone.
Wishbone. So is this a wishbone?
It is a wishbone. Indeed it is. He's a stuffed toy. I had, honestly, that he migrates in and out from episode to episode is something that I had never noticed before. The very fact that he moves, I mean, the library here is not a museum. People have referred to it that way, but it's not. It's a working library. And sometimes I'm sitting in that corner, pouring through something that I'm working on or trying to find some reference. I know somebody said something about this. I'm sitting there where that's the best light. So you got to move, dog. He doesn't always get back in the corner.
Well, it's good to see you with Wishbone today.
Yes, I think he knew that this would be a unique moment. So, he's
a special occasion. And I must say, again, for those of us who do follow Steve Doyle in sort of more than one format, we are all waiting for the day when you are talking with someone on the Fortnightly Dispatch and the creature we now know as Wishbone is innocently sitting on the couch, when out from behind your head will leap a tawny, small, leonine creature to attack the dog. But
right, he wanted down. Yeah, you're obviously referring to our cat Daryl, who is. I think he probably needs his own Facebook page by now, but he's the first cat in a long string of cats we've had over our adult lives who have finally won basement privileges. And he wanted down here this morning, Ross, but not today, sir.
Not today. Okay, but in the Doyle household, there is even both a Sherlockian dog and a Sherlockian cat. We now know. You really are and now all joking aside, you really are a great community builder in our Sherlockian world. And on behalf of all of us, thank you very much. And thank you very much for all your time today. It's been great talking with you.
Well, this has been a joy. And, I never really had anticipated we'd turn the tables like this. So it's quite a different experience for me. But thank you, Ross, for, going easy on me.
Well, it was a great pleasure. And thanks a million, Steve. And I am looking forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks on the next episode of the Fortnightly Dispatch. Take care. Thank you all very much for joining us today for another episode of the Fortnightly Dispatch. It has been a pleasure and an honor to substitute for Steve today, but I am sure you, like me, will be very happy to see Steve back in the chair next time. Take care. Bye-bye.